So in this lesson, we're going to take a deeper look at the conditional locks. So we have got probability, fill, and conditional locks. These used to be all together in one parameter in the Digitact 1 and also in the Syntacct. But with the new Digitact 2, these have been separated, which opens more possibilities because you can then independently have different settings for each on a single trig. So we'll cover that in the advanced stage of the course and how we can come up with some quite cool stuff integrating the three. But what I'm going to do in this lesson is separate the conditional locks, and we'll talk about fills in the next lesson. And I'll keep it really simple and basic so it makes it easier to understand, because it is quite a complex thing to try and grasp the first time. So what I'm going to do is just use this sound here and just turn it up a bit. So just one of the standard toms that comes with a default patch. And we're just going to use that for the demonstration. So to add a conditional lock, first add a trig, or you can put a trig straight down like that and then add a conditional lock. What I'm going to do first is just show you what pre is. And we're going to use these integrated with the probability. So what I'm going to do is put one on the fifth trig, and then we're going to take a bit of a deeper look at what pre-positive and pre-negative is. Or you can call these pre-true and pre-false. So if I put a trig on the first one and then we bring down the percentage to 50, that means the probability of this trig to play will be 50%. So it's a bit of a coin toss. So let's see what happens when these two interact with each other now. So neither of them played, but the second time both of them played. What pre does is it listens to the trigger before it. Now if the trigger before it triggers, this one will also trigger. If I turn it to pre-false, this trigger will always trigger until that one is triggered. So I'll play it just to show you an example. So it's not playing, but that time it did play because this one didn't. And also what you can do is set up a string of these as well. So if we just put these on pre, and you could imagine that you are creating like a fill with these. Whenever that triggers, they all trigger as well. We can also do it with the fill button, I think, if I can remember rightly from using the Syntacct. Let's just use fill on this first one and see if that works. So they're not triggering, but... So yeah, it also works for that as well. Really cool. So you can set off a string of events by using the pre. What I'm going to do is just put this back to 50%. And then what I'm going to do is just experiment with using a mix of pre's and pre-true and pre-false. So let's just put them like this. Maybe we'll do pre-false and then a pre. So listen to the difference now. That triggering is going to cause a different reaction. So when it doesn't trigger, we get that. And when it triggers, eventually, it's like you don't want to trigger. Let's put the probability a bit. Oh, my bad. I've still got it on fill. Let me turn it off and put it back to 50%. Sorry about that. So you can see when it triggers, we get a different pattern. So there's many possibilities of how you can use that. You can use it to kind of spice up a sequence a little bit and add some randomization to a sequence, where what you could do normally is you could put a percentage on all of these like this. Let's say we put 50% on all of them. Then we get randomization all the time. But it's a little bit chaotic. And the reason for using a conditional lock is you might want to have some randomization, but you might want it to trigger off a specific fill. And maybe you have like parameter locks attached to them as well. We will cover this in the more advanced tips and tricks, but for now I'm going to keep it really, really simple. And then let's go to the next one. So again, let's put 50% on the first lock as our tester. And then for the conditional locks, we will go to neighbor. In fact, for the neighbor, what this does is it listens to the track on the left-hand side of the track. So on track 3, we've got this sound, but on track 2, we've got a snare. So what we can do is, and it also relates to where this is in the sequence as well. So it will listen to the track to the left of it, but it will also listen to the trig before it, if that makes sense. So what I'm going to do to demonstrate that is put 2 snares there, but then on the 4th one, actually let's put 1 snare, and then on the 3rd one, what I'm going to do is put this at 50%. So it's going to listen to this track, but it's going to listen to the last trig before that trig on the 5. So let's go back to the neighbor track. And then let's put neighbor positive. So if the trig on the 3 on the snare track triggers, then this is also going to trigger. So you can hear it there. That hit. Didn't hit, so we didn't hit this one. There you go. So yeah, quite simple stuff. And then we've also got the opposite, which is false. So this will trigger until that one on the snare track triggers. So it triggered then. Didn't trigger that time because this one triggered. So the next one I want to show you is quite a simple one. Actually, let's just use the kick this time. So we can go first, and that means every time you start the sequence or change to this pattern, the kick will hit the first time, but it won't hit anywhere past that. And if we go to, say, this pattern here, then we go to pattern 15, you'll hear that it triggers on the first one, but not on the other ones. This is really useful, actually, in a live set, because what I use first for is if I want to trigger, like, a noise burst or an effect sample that's got a lot of reverb on it, I'll put that on the first hit, and I'll put first. So when I change my pattern after doing a build-up, it drops in, and then we get first. That's probably the most useful use case that I use it for. But obviously, you can use it for many different reasons. And then we've also got another one, which is false. So that means that it won't play the first time, but it will play every other time. So we've also got that one. And then let's go to the next ones. We've also got last as well. So what last does is, if I just copy that over and maybe stick it on 13, this will never play until I try and change the pattern. So if I change the pattern in a second, it will play the last time that I've changed the pattern. So just before the pattern change, it will trigger. So obviously that can be quite useful as well. Maybe you want to trigger, say, like a fill before you change the pattern. Let's try that maybe on the snare. So what I'll do is I'll go back to 15. Let's just put in some kick drums, and then on the snare what we'll do is we'll just do a quick snare fill like this, and then we will go last. So this won't trigger. Obviously, if you change the pattern slightly late, it only caught 2 there. So what I need to do really is wait until it gets there, then quickly change the pattern like this. I've done it again. Let me go to the change. Let me change this length to 64, and then we've got a bit more time to kind of wait for that to come in. So let's go to back to this one, sorry. Put 64 on. Let's just get rid of these on the 3 bars, apart from the last one. That should give me a bit more time, because I can see I can wait for it to go around again. So it didn't trigger that time, but then if I change pattern this time, it'll trigger right on the end. We can also do another thing as well. So what we can also do is change it to false. So that means it will trigger every time until I try and change the pattern, then it will stop. So I've changed pattern now. Now I'll just give you a quick example of where I think this could be useful. So let's say if we change last to positive, but then with the kick drum, what we can do with the kick drum is we can go right to the end, and what we can do is change the conditional locks of these to last false. So what it means is just before we change a pattern, and by the way, this is the first time that I've tried doing this, it's just come to me now, this is a great idea. It means that it can do pulling away of the kick before you change the pattern automatically for you. So let's go to the snare again. And let's just spice up this snare a bit. So what I'm going to do is just copy these trigs, because these are last positive trigs. So it means that the kick drum's going to come out, and then these are going to trigger. And then let's just add a bit of reverb to the snare as well. So let's play this. So the kick drum, let's just go to that. We'll play it every single time. Let's let it do one more, and then after these 4 bars, I'm going to try and change the pattern and listen to the end. So listen to the end now. Now that I've triggered the pattern change. So that's great in a live context because you might be doing other stuff with your hands and it just makes it a lot easier to change and do something interesting right at the end. I tend to do all of that stuff live, like I'll pull out the kick and then I'll hit the snare drum and stuff with the fill button, but you might come up with a complex track where you want to do other stuff and let the Digitax 2 take care of that. Don't forget, you can combine all of that stuff with some of the other conditional locks as well, so you can get quite creative of how it reacts with the probabilities and everything. And you can have like a different snare fill every time with some probabilities. So what we're going to do next is take a look at some of the other locks that we've got. So I'll just keep it quite simple for this. What I'm going to do is just focus on the tom again. And then with this one, what we're going to do is take a look at these conditional locks. So these have been updated a little bit, because if I remember on the Syntacts, unless it's also been updated recently, these have now got false lines on the top of them as well. And I'll explain what they do in a second, but what I'm going to do first is just show you what these are in simple terms. So these are useful. These have been really useful for me when creating a very, very long sequence. What I'm going to do is I'm going to narrow this sequence down to just 16 steps, just to prove a point that what you can do is you can take one single bar and turn it into something a lot more complex. So you can basically take all of these 8 bars and have a different sequence run every time using these conditional locks. So if I put this on 1 out of 2 bars, it means this trig will play 1 out of 2 times. So it means that it'll run through this 1 bar twice, and on the first time, every time it'll play this trig. So there's the first one. Didn't play the second time. It'll play again, and it just repeats until you stop the sequencer. If we put it on 1 out of 4, then it'll play the first time, and then it won't play for 3 more bars. So then it's come back on the first one. You can also change what bar it plays on out of the 4. So what you can do is you can say, I want it to play the second time. So it doesn't play the first, plays the second time, won't play the third, it won't play the fourth, and then it'll start again. It won't play the first, but then it'll play the second. So you could have different ones in the same sequence, which I do quite often. So like, let's say on the first bar, I want these 2 to play and the 7, and then let's go out of 4. So let me just copy this one. I know this is gets a little bit complex when you start messing around with it, but just to show you how it can sound, let's put 3 out of 4 on those. Let's paste these ones in, hold them down, and put 4 out of 4. And let's have a listen to that. So that's just 1 bar, 16 trigs, and it sounds like a 4-bar sequence. So we've got that going on, and then we've also got the false as well, which I'll show you. But it's also worth noting before we move on that with these conditional locks, you can go all the way up to 8 bars, which is intense. So imagine that if you make this full sequence a full 128 steps, which is 8 bars, you could then expand that by putting this on 8 bars, and then that just expands it even more. You can make massive sequences this way. And then along with some of the other conditional locks and the fills and the probabilities and everything, you can come up with really, really complex sequences. So let me just bring that back down. Let's look at what false does now then. So with false, it does the opposite. So if I put this on, let's just make it quite simple. Let's go to 1 out of 4, but false, and listen to what happens. So I don't know if you can guess, but basically what happens is it does the opposite. So if you go to 1 out of 4, it plays the first time, doesn't play for the next 3 times. If you go to 1 out of 4 false, then it doesn't play the first time, but then it will play for the next 3 times. That's a new feature that I haven't seen on the previous Digitact and the Syntacts. So that's really, really cool. It's very useful.